Welcome to Cybersecurity Today, the weekend edition. I'm your host, Jim Love. This week we have our regular panel, Terry Cutler, head of Cyology Labs.
How are you?
I'm fine. David Shipley, head of Beauceron Security. You're in Toronto right now. You're on the road.
I am in the outskirts of the GTA near Pearson Airport, which is my second home at this point in my life. So pray for me, folks.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And we have a special guest today. My friend Laura Payne agreed to do the show. So thank you very much, Laura. Welcome.
Thanks, Jim. Happy to be here.
And since you're new to the panel, you get to do a 2 or 3 sentence introduction so everybody knows who you are.
Sure. Well, Laura Payne, and I've been doing cybersecurity stuff for way too long, probably about 15 years. And yeah, just in various different roles, and excited to be here and chat about whatever is. Jim's going to throw some stuff at us. He might go off script. Who knows?
We are. We're never on script is our problem. Tell me, your company is called White Tuque.
Yeah, our founder, Rob Stewart, he's a Canadian guy and he's a white hat. And so what's a Canadian white hat? It's a White Tuque, and that's us. So yeah, we operate in Canada and south of the border as well, and to deliver security services for small, medium, and some large enterprise too. Actually, we have a pretty good spread cross section in who we serve.
Canada, eh?
Cool.
Yeah, Canada.
Canada, eh? Yeah. So here's our format. Laura, you're new to this. I'm going to give you what we came up with, some of the most interesting stories from the past week in cybersecurity. And then we do a bit of a deeper dive on those. So couple of news stories that have come up for comment. I'm going to start with the first one. CISA added some critical vulnerabilities to the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. Now, on the podcast, I try and balance about making these announcements. You could just spend your whole podcast just reading all the things that have happened. But this seemed a little different to me, or at least got my attention. The U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, has added 3 significant vulnerabilities to the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. And I guess this is the idea of they add to the catalog if it's been exploited. The vulnerabilities affect ImageMagick, the Linux kernel, and the SonicWall Sonic OS. Now, the particular one that got my attention, we did a story on it, was the SonicWall Sonic OS. It's got a score of 9.3, which I guess is high, and it could allow attackers to bypass access controls and give you unauthorized system access. And the other 2 are also severe. ImageMagick, you can get remote code execution through manipulating images, which got me. And then the other one involves the Linux kernel. What was your take on these stories?
Well, I think, first of all, thank God someone's done some prioritization of vulnerabilities, because you open your email every morning and just want to cry. Like, if you're responsible for patch management, and God forbid you're responsible for patch management in an organization that has change management, actual rigor, because oh, great, I got to get this scheduled between now and the next 6 months. Fantastic. And so it just becomes a big pile driving exercise. It's important. Don't get me wrong. By having a known exploited vulnerability, they're helping answer that question of, okay, is it also a threat? Now, yes, it's a vulnerability, but is there an actual active threat? So you get some injection of priority into that. What I also like to add to this is, for once, it's not Fortinet. I mean, they've got to be breathing a sigh of release, because last year it was Fortinet RCE, Fortinet RCA, meaning Palo Alto made the hit list in the last 12 months. And then SonicWall is now due. But edge security devices are getting pounded. Every vendor's device is getting worked hard, because it's amazing, right? Get in on the edge, and it has to be exposed to the internet. It provides a valuable function. But these things can hurt you. And the last thing I'll say is, hopefully federal government agencies actually follow CISA's "thou shalt patch these things."
This is what happened, exactly what you mentioned there a couple of years ago. We did an incident response on a company who didn't follow up with their patches. They didn't have a proper vulnerability management program in place, and they left these things unpatched for more than a year. And what happened now is they were able to bypass firewall, get into the controls, and instead of launching a ransomware attack, they launched a BitLocker attack, which is a lay of the land tools, right? Because these are legit tools that IT administrators use. So obviously the alarms didn't go off. It's a legit tool. And they BitLocked the entire environment with different keys for every machine. And they were charging, I think there were $20,000 per computer, and there was 400 computers in there.
So one of the key things that we do is look at how do we prioritize vulnerabilities And the CISA exploit list is like top notch, like especially, and as to David's point, right? Internet exposed assets, if it's exploited, you don't have time. And that company that's got rigorous change management also has an emergency change process, guaranteed. These are emergencies. And it's so important, right? And it's actually a huge service that CISA does, sharing this information so that people can very quickly float these things up in their conscience and get them dealt with. It's nice to have that in there for comparison, but we know those exploited vulnerabilities, even if they're a 2 or a 3 rating, those ones, why are they being exploited? Because they're that foothold into your environment. They're just step 1. And if you give the attacker step 1, then 2, 3, 4 follows, right? So always fix those exploited vulnerabilities as soon as you can.
We're seeing similar situations also. Like we do a lot of work in healthcare. And when we want to do a patch application to a firewall, oftentimes it requires a reboot.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're working in healthcare, you try to plan ahead. Okay, these routers are going to reboot on Monday night, 3 a.m. when nobody supposedly is working. But then at the last minute, you'll have some doctor says, no, you can't do that. I need that system up online. And then it just messes up the entire patch schedule. So we have to make sure you have a proper patch management, like change management thing in place as well.
Yeah.
You know, everyone had their big chuckle at poor CrowdStrike this summer, but hey, we all got problems. So, 9.3 CVS, that's an ouchie. That's usually going to be a remote code execution kind of shenanigans. Nobody's perfect in this business.
Another follow-up, and I raised this because I came across my desk and I was looking at it going, this is a clickbait headline, but it came out of the Register, and the Register has their opinions, but they're generally not like sort of big clickbait type of thing. But they said, did Microsoft really break Windows? Microsoft's latest patch Tuesday, they patched over 70 security flaws and all of those. But one of them jumps out at me, and it's a bug, CVE 2024-43491, affects Windows version, only one Windows version, 1507. But it's a critical flaw. And we talked about the rating, 9.8 in the CVSS severity. And it causes the operating system to silently undo previously applied updates and security patches for certain optional components. You're exposed and all of your patches have gone away. Has anybody heard about this one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was featured in Black Hat as well. It was where it gained a fair bit of traction, I believe, was right around that time, as far as publicity, firewalls and everything else, where like you can't help the fact that some of these processes have to be exposed to do their job, but they are also then the most important to have protected. When flaws are found in them or vulnerabilities are found in them, they are extremely urgent to address.
And it adds so much more complexity, right? Because Microsoft has to like ensure backward compatibility for all these other components that are going to be coming in here. And, one bad mistake can break a whole bunch of services. So it's a big challenge.
It's not like this is sitting in the giant, massive nerd trivia of my head. Windows 10 1507 is the OG Windows 10. That's Windows 10 on release. And that's July 2015. And you might be thinking, who in God's good name is still using the 2015 version? And then I read on some of the follow-up stuff that it was the IoT version as well. And I'm like, oh,
Right.
Amazing. That means a lot, probably a lot of medical devices. I'm just going to throw that one out here. More
At least
than
I'm
I
not
am
running Windows
comfortable-
3.1.
Can my cynical
it's-
self then share, though, that it's probably not doing auto updates, so maybe it's not a problem after all?
Laura, I believe that's the optimist side of this equation. And first of all, Terry, Southwest Airlines survival strategy from Crowdpocalypse was Windows 3.1. So, don't you be bad talking our Windows for Work groups.
That's why I brought it up.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, there's a good chuckle here, but there probably is an uncomfortable amount of devices exposed to this in uncomfortable places that if they were getting auto patches were left open. And this combined with the other vulnerabilities that allowed people to downgrade Windows to reverse patches that affected other versions tells a really, really important story. It tells a story that things are becoming incredibly complex for Microsoft in the volume of vulnerabilities we were just talking about at the start of it, and now the depth of support. And it begs really important systemic risk questions that I think we're still ignoring from Crowdpocalypse. And who Microsoft is accountable to or not accountable to for systemic vulnerabilities. One bad day in Redmond is a really bad day for us. Kudos on them for the fact that we don't have more of these shenanigans, but they're accountable to who? You know, it's like you got the whole world in your hands and someday you're going to have Butterfingers and we're all going to be cool with it. Maybe not.
Mm. So let's move on to even more serious. This was a week, I think, where I used to say when I was in charge of our company systems, I didn't need an alarm clock because I woke up screaming every night. But there's another one. A $20 domain purchase exposes an incredible vulnerability. I got to run this by for the audience. If you haven't listened to the podcast, shame on you, but I'll run it by just for $20. This guy, Benjamin Harris, I guess he's a security researcher. He's playing around in his hotel room. And for a lark, he buys a domain name that comes up. He says, this is the Whois server for all .mobi websites. And I think most of the audience knows what a Whois server is, but just think about like the phone book of the internet. It tells you who owns the website and all the contact information. Pretty important. But here's where it gets wild. Harris uses this to set up his own Whois server for this .mobi. And suddenly he's flooded with requests from all over the world. And when we're not talking like little companies, we're talking big tech companies, governments, universities, you name it. Harris is now running Whois for a whole section of .mobi. And they're asking his server for information, thinking it's still the official source. I know that the internet is a little dicey in terms of its security, but this blew my mind. Anybody else check that story out?
I saw it when you shared it, and yeah. I don't know that internet and security are two words that actually go side by side very well.
What I will say about this is consequences. So the TLDs, we've been running around adding TLDs like nobody's business. So this one was .mobi. Did we really, really need .mobi? Clearly not, because even Whois is like, man, it's boring. But this is the debt that gets technical debt that then gets accrued and charged to all of us. The fact that we're also messing around now with domains that many people had originally designed their architecture, their Active Directory around that, okay, we'll just use this particular domain. Now those domains are actually internet domains, and that's causing hilarity as well. Great for me in the phishing business, I guess, that thank God there's so many vanity TLDs out there where it's like, oh, I can't get that domain for fish to fish you, but I can get .mobi. Yeehaw. So yeah, now this is just an example of that the internet was designed by a bunch of researchers and tossed at a bunch of universities and then so rapidly commercialized that our heads spun. And now we're like, how do we take this dumpster fire and make it worse?
Well, we can make it worse by having the redirection attacks, right? Because they can make the changes and have the visitors redirect to a malicious site or malicious server where they might collect additional information or have them get infected. So you have to really protect your domains.
Well, imagine this guy had taken it a step further. So he sees all this malicious traffic coming in, or this intentional traffic coming in, and he pops open his little list of CVEs and figures things out, or just sits on it for a while. And then he figures out how to own major Fortune 500 companies, and they wouldn't even see it coming.
Well, he was just too ethical to do it, thank heaven. I think the thing we forget is that we've built all of these applications and all of this stuff on the internet, and we're dealing with a 1990s technology and structure that really this goes back to ARPANET, this Whois type thing. This is back in the old days when before we actually even had browsers, and the whole internet is sitting on that structure. Goes down to this, and I guess we're going to have to do a show on this at one point in terms of, updating technical debt, but this vulnerability is huge for that.
Bring back Netscape Navigator.
And if let's just run to scare yourself, understand that Border Gateway Protocol, BGP, was literally sketched out at a lunch on a napkin. That was the original RFC here, right? And it hasn't improved much since.
I think the best analogy is the internet is like a city that was built on the goat paths and the cow paths of the farming routes that, were there beforehand. And it's built so that it functions, but it's not sexy or exciting to deal with, well, what happens when something retires, or what happens when something is decommissioned, and what's the correct things to do there to keep it clean. And to David's point around accountability, there really isn't a lot of accountability, or it's very hard to change and update accountability structures. Certificates are another area that has that whole problem, where there are accountable organizations and there are rules and there's ways to revoke certificates, but they were not built for the volumes that current technology is putting through. So it's becoming less and less plausible to use the designs that were initially put in place. They were okay at old volumes. They just don't work now. But with nobody, there's no money in solving the problems either, right? Like, until something actually breaks, and then maybe there'll be money in it.
Another story, I'm just hitting them out of the park this week in terms of what the stories that we're following, was this other story. And this just came up. It was this guy, they have a big industrial company, and one of their engineers goes rogue, and he's working in their infrastructure. And this isn't some faceless hacker from halfway around the world. They even named the guy Daniel Ryan, who knew the systems inside and out. Daniel got a little disgruntled and gained unauthorized access to administrator accounts. He locked out the admins, wiped the backups, started shutting down servers, and then demanded $750,000 in Bitcoin. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Thank God that he wasn't that smart. He sends out an ominous email to everybody in the company and says, pay up or watch your business crumble. And of course, the cops could trace that email and get back to him and catch him. So that's a story. And you go, giggle, 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 a little bit in there. Isn't this crazy? And then you think about how many places out there have people who have access to extreme credentials. And are we really managing that? Are we really paying enough attention to internal threats?
Well, look, this is the exact situation that happened with a customer years ago, where we did a penetration test on them and we sent in the report. And maybe next day I get a call, Terry, are you in our inbox? I'm like, no. Crap, we're being hacked. Next, just the hacker had access to pretty much everybody's inboxes. They got access to our report. So now they know all the other vulnerable systems. They got into those too, started deleting backups. Then they also were able to extract all the passwords to their customers. So they were able to log into those guys too and start causing some mayhem. And they had a suspicion. They suspected who it could be, which was a previous employee, but they couldn't prove it because he's coming through a VPN. He's covering his tracks. Long story short, we had to work with the ISP. We had law enforcement involved. What we're going to do is we're going to reboot that guy's modem while we're doing a full packet trace. They reboot the modem, and all of a sudden now we notice the packet stopped. That's how we were able to know it was that person, or else we would never have found this guy.
I'm just silent here. You tracked it by rebooting the modems?
Yeah. That's how we were able to confirm it was that person we suspected, because you have to have enough proof to suspect it's that person. So that's the only way you will get a warrant through law enforcement and the ISP in order to pull that off.
If you have disgruntled employees, if they are pissed at you, you're not going to fix that technologically. There are some safeguards you can put in. But number one, try not to piss a human being off so bad that they're willing to break the law to come after you. Hey, number two,
especially
if you
it's
think
the
someone's
IT guy.
Yeah, I mean, and odds are, very few of these stories I've seen the headlines where it's like, we never saw this coming. He's been pretty mad for a long time. In fact, Jurassic Park has the original insider threat with Dennis Nedry. And what do we see in the scenes? Dennis is like, hey, I'm not really happy. I'm not getting paid appropriately for my work. I got some problems here. Can you help me out? And he's like, that's your problem, man. Do your work, IT person. And they're like, I'll steal your intellectual property. Like, literally, the movie is exactly what we're talking about. So treat your Dennis Nedrys kindly, maybe an idea, or get rid of them fast and have some controls to detect the activities when it goes off the rail. But then a month goes by where you don't hear about somebody getting thrown in jail in the States for wiping out your entire company's data set and backups. So if you're thinking this is rare, it's not. What bothers me about insider threat is that oftentimes everything becomes insider threats, which is basically IT's way of saying people are the problem everyone is, once you're inside our perimeter, then you're the insider threat. No, what you're talking about is what I agree with, that you now have a highly motivated person willing to commit intentional criminal acts. And there's lots you can do to prevent it and see it coming. That's my controversial take.
Yeah, I don't know that it's that controversial because, people with controls or with a lot of power, they become the liability if they are no longer aligned to the company's best interests. And, there are technical aspects. You can reduce their scope of controls. You can make sure that you have the appropriate logging. I talk to people all the time about how much logging they should be doing if they want to be able to put the story together after something happens. Nobody wants to do that much logging. I understand the costs and the implications as well. But these stories help prove the point that at the bare minimum, if you can't put the story together afterwards, then you are going to have to live with the cost of trusting somebody you shouldn't have trusted. And for most businesses, that's not a safe bet.
Now, if you're Samsung and you're laying off 30% of your workforce, apparently, as the news is breaking, I'd be buckling up for some insider threat. I mean, notably, there's no one in our production teams, and we're just getting rid of administrative folks. IT is usually in your administrative staff. So if we do see a major pwnage or insider threat thing happening in Samsung, I would like to claim appropriate credit today for calling.
Yeah. And if you're a cybersecurity pro listening to this, you probably know all this stuff, so you're good. But if you're a business owner or, you're in the business side or you maybe not into the tech of cybersecurity, there are some things you need to do. You need to have an exit process. You need to make sure you can recover passwords. You need a central storage where these passwords are. You need to ask the question all the time, why do you need this and how long do you need it for? And if people aren't asking those types of questions, then you are leaving yourself exposed. It's not just disgruntled employee gets in on one of your servers. I've seen people walk away with social media account passwords that are unrecoverable. And why? The person just goes off the planet, or they can't be reached, and you can't reach your social media accounts. So if you're listening to this and you haven't asked the questions, how do I reduce access? And how do I make sure the company owns its passwords and not its employees, especially small shops? You have a lot of places with one person has all of the passwords. So I went to the person, I said, not that I don't trust you. What if you got hit by a truck?
Mm-hmm.
And we actually had an exercise. What if you got hit by a truck? And that freed us up to have our password stored. So it's not perfect, but when your company falls apart or when people just walk away and they quit, walk out, don't let them take your company with them.
We had a situation today, actually, at a customer where they let go one of their sales employees. And what did he do? He walked out with the entire client list and the pricing that they have for the company. But he was a little uneducated, we'll say, because he emailed files from his company to his personal email. So that's how they were able to find it. But a lot of times they plug in a USB key, transfer everything over to it, and walk away. And they don't realize that the stuff's been walking right out the door.
And Laura, you may not know, when I said David was our culture critic, I didn't mean like culture and enterprises only. He also handles culture and movies and stuff like that. So he's required by his contract to make some link to a movie somewhere through the show. I'm going to shift gears here and talk about Avis. Oh, sorry, David. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, I have actually given an entire enterprise risk workshop using Jurassic Park and taking apart the original movie in various different ways to understand risk and technology and people. And it is my default goldmine, except now I'm finding out that Gen Z and now Gen A, their version of Jurassic Park is deeply flawed. So, I may need some new material.
I feel
When I
bad.
was
I never
teaching
even
at
seen the
university,
movie.
Oh yeah. When I was teaching at a university, I realized that it was time for me to retire when they no longer got any of the jokes I made. And David has this added thing that he can do is he can be sitting there on the couch watching an old movie and everybody can come up to him and say, can't you see I'm working? Shifting gears, Avis got hacked, and there's a lot of companies get hacked. Why did this one jump out at me? Well, Avis got 30,000 US customers where their data went out, and its names, mailing address, email addresses, phone numbers, dates of birth, credit cards, expiration dates, and of course, driver's licenses, being a car rental company. They were unsure about whether this was an internal breach or whatever, but they responded pretty well in terms of saying they were going to give free credit monitoring to victims and all that sort of stuff. I still remember when car companies changed over to having a real digital service, we just applauded. Nobody wants to fill in those 65 forms. You're late, you're tired, you got to turn over the car, they do all this sort of stuff. And now you can just drive in and drive out. But now you've got a heck of a lot of data from people who are traveling, high income, usually business, and that exposure can be really, really intense. And maybe that line from that old commercial about rental cars, we try harder, should be applying to cybersecurity.
I think it's indicative of sort of it's an okay response. It's a bit of a lazy response, though. Let me give you a year of credit monitoring. I think that's the, I'm tall enough to ride response. But the issue here is the driver's license, right? Like the credit monitoring is nice, but what do you do when you find out somebody's actively trying to steal your identity? What if they are successful in stealing your identity and there's no identity recovery service attached to that as well? That would be a much more meaningful gesture and something more than a year, because a lot of attackers are going to sit on this stuff and they'll wait. I mean, the credit cards they'll use right away, but the identity theft, they'll wait until they know it's out of monitoring phase and then they'll see what they can do with it, right?
If 5 companies get breached and they all offer you credit monitoring, now you're being monitored by 5 different companies.
It's probably only one though, right? Like how many credit monitoring companies?
And that comes down to the whole thing where, all this gigs and terabytes of data just left your business. And this is one of the solutions, or one of the problems we see when companies are using log-based solutions, because it's not providing the whole story. You want to have like a full network, full packet capture solution where it can see all the traffic coming in and out of your business in real time and then take action on it. So, because you're receiving an alert. Why is 30 gigs leaving your business by this one person? Is that normal? Is it a backup? And we've also seen situations where the backup server was unprotected. It had a flaw, which allowed you to actually download every single backup they've done. So maybe your systems didn't get breached, but the cloud did. Mm-hmm. And that's how they're able to get a backup of your data.
I really like this about vulnerabilities is it also applies to identity theft. Is that like a low impact identity theft plus another low impact identity theft plus another one goes from low impact to medium to ow. And, something I've mentioned before is this concept of data radioactivity, right? So the more breaches that you get in, it's lifelong dose, right? Never goes away, it just becomes cumulative. And it really speaks to the absolute garbage job we've done in Canada, prioritizing national privacy legislation. And I could tell you it is going nowhere slowly. And I think, there's not a snowball's chance in hell it's going to get anywhere because we managed to bolt on AI that everybody hates, regulation. So great. So, this also comes, by the way, I'm feeling a little bit bitter that a court ruling said, yes, Facebook was in the wrong because of Cambridge Analytica. Haha, Canadian law, PIPEDA did apply. Yeah, well, what's the exact consequence? Nada. But I mean, great. So the only people making money right now off of the data breach disclosures, besides the giant legal teams, breach coaches, are the identity monitoring companies. And the last thing I'll mention is this. What would actually be useful, dear government leaders in Canada, outside of Quebec, because good on you, Quebec, is credit freezes. If you're in a god-awful number of breaches, being able to say, you know what, unless my bald smiling face is sitting in a chair with 2 pieces of ID, you ain't issuing any credit. That would be useful.
That would make a lot of sense. Well, and we were talking about back to the Moby domain server and what happens when things need to be changed over, need to be recovered. And identity recovery is so convoluted, and that's a process that could very much be fixed from the identity providers. Core government services around how do you get your identity back? The fact that, you could get a new social insurance number, but there's no way to actively rescind an old number. There's nobody checks when they get a social insurance number in their hand. Is this number still valid? Is this really a number I can use? These aren't actually that difficult to solve, but they just haven't been prioritized.
And this is a challenge too. I do a lot of awareness training to the general public. And when these guys get scammed or breached, there's nothing they can do about it. It's because they gave away this information and they expected the company to secure it for them, and they failed, right? Oh, we take your security and privacy very seriously. Give me a break. We've heard this so many times. But now the consumer is left holding the bag. What can they do? Nothing. They're along for the ride. It's unfortunate.
Well, and my favorite part about, I am not a lawyer, although I like to play one in panels. If you actually had the moxie, there's a word that I wish you could bring back, moxie, and actually go to the mat with one of these companies because you're pissed off and your data's out there. You know, one of the best defenses they have? How can you conclusively prove that this data was lost only by us? You might be able to say the loss of this data caused me this harm. They'll ride with that. Like, yeah, geez, that's terrible. But you can't prove conclusively it was us. The glove does not fit. You got to acquit, right? It's just so awful.
There are more services becoming available, by the way, proactively for consumers to buy into. But again, that requires awareness, and it means putting out of your own pocket ahead of time for something that is somebody else's fault at the end of the day. But I would certainly consider, if you're a reasonable net worth individual, it is worth looking into and considering whether that's how you want to mitigate your risk, just like your other insurances, right?
There's always been a challenge for me. I've been teaching this stuff for 20 years, and the individual just doesn't care about cybersecurity until it's too late. They don't have time to watch a digital course. They don't have time to watch these YouTube channels. They think, who's going to want to hack them? They're small fish. But then when they get hacked, it's like, oh my God, how could this have happened? And they have no idea what to do. And then if you want to engage a cybersecurity expert, it's a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And there's no guarantee to get your stuff back. It's unfortunate. Awareness is key.
Well, Jim, I teased you last week with some data and some interesting things. And we've been doing some really interesting research about what we're calling the psychology of cybersecurity. In psychology, there's an interesting thing called the optimism bias. The optimism bias is our built-in blinders that says bad thing X happens to other people, not me. We are hardwired. It is literally right into our limbic system in our brain. Now, it's really important because otherwise you wouldn't get out of the bed in the morning if you didn't have an optimism bias, because you'd be like, the whole world is going to get me. So we kind of need this bias. But when it comes to cyber, what I can tell you is that this bias, I am not going to be the target of criminals. People who strongly believe that are 30% more likely to fall for phishing. People that believe that their organization is not a target are 30% more likely to fall for phishing. People that believe that having antivirus and firewalls and cool security tools completely protects them are 50% more likely to click on a phishing email. And so, Terry, to your point, we don't have an awareness problem. I mean, God knows we've been yakking long enough to a very large audience. There's others. I'm in the media literally every other day. Terry, you're in there quite a bit. Laura, I'm sure if you're not in the media yet, I'm sure once you've been on this podcast, you're going to start getting phone calls. We don't have an awareness problem. We have a motivation problem. Why should I care about this right now? I can't afford groceries. I can't afford a house or rental right now. I am stressed out of my mind, and someone just whispered in my ear, some AI Terminator bot is going to take my white collar job. Like, I got problems, 99 problems, and worrying about phishing or passwords isn't one of them. The challenge is giving people a chance to want to care about it and nurturing that.
And that's why I don't trust the tools. I don't have an optimism bias. I simply drink. You guys have always cheered me up. There's a lot happening, and it's easy to get overwhelmed by it.
If you actually do care about it, if you say, I play an important role in protecting myself, I am responsible for doing this, you're 30% less likely to fall victim to phishing. So changing your mindset about security, getting involved, taking steps, patching the known exploited vulnerabilities in a timely fashion, deploying tools, but knowing they have their limitations. We can get past this problem. I do want to add something quickly, Jim, because there's late breaking news. It just broke apparently 2 hours ago. So Microsoft just had its big summit about the post-crowd apocalypse and what antivirus vendors you were fearing that you getting kicked out of the kernel party. Let me just tell you that the first message has been sent. And it was sent in such beautiful language of we're finding new ways to improve our platform outside of the kernel. So the great kernel Windows security war of 2024 is on.
Well, on that happy note, I think
Bring beer on the
we'll
next
adjourn till
episode.
next week. Watch this space. There'll be more happening there. We have to wrap it up there. Hope this was good for you, the audience as well. If there are topics you want us to dive deeper into, let me know, as well as any comments about the show at editorial@technewsday.ca. Thanks to the panel. I was going to say from east to west when I introduced you. I hope we got that way, but it's really east to middle. So we're going to look for somebody from the west as well. I think that we're going to get a volunteer from the west. That'll be our mission. But thank you to David Shipley, head of Beauceron Security in downtown Toronto, sitting or no, at the outskirts of Toronto. Thanks, David.
Thanks for having me.
Terry Cutler from Cyology Labs in Montreal.
Thank you for having me. Next time I'll bring some lemon Coke.
All right. And Laura, wait for your phone to start ringing now. The show goes live on Saturday, so just be waiting for that phone to start ringing for media encounters. Thank you to our special guest, Laura Payne. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jim. It's been a pleasure to be here.
And thanks to you, our listeners, for spending part of your weekend with us. I'll be back in the cybersecurity news desk on Monday morning. I'm your host, Jim Love. Have a great weekend.